The unexpected discovery. The sun was setting on the barren world of Earth. Alien invaders had swept across the planet, conquering cities and destroying anything that stood in their way. They came from a distant star system, armed with advanced technology and a ruthless desire to control everything in their path. Nothing could stop them, until now. A small group of alien soldiers, part of the elite conqueror's army, marched through the ruins of a long-abandoned human city. The air was thick with dust, and the ground cracked beneath their heavy boots. The buildings around them were shattered, victims of the alien ship's powerful energy weapons. The Earthlings had long since given up their fight, their cities reduced to rubble. All that remained were empty shells of human civilization. The aliens had heard rumors of a secret human military base hidden deep within the Earth. According to their intelligence, the base held relics from a time when humans fought their fiercest battles. The soldiers were skeptical, laughing at the idea that such ancient weapons could hold any value. They believed they had already wiped out the last traces of human resistance, and the so-called relics were nothing but myths. But the orders were clear. They were to find and destroy anything that could pose a threat to their rule, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. The commander of this small group, a cold and calculating alien named Zoreth, led the charge. He was an experienced soldier, having led countless invasions across the galaxy. His confidence in his victory was unshakable. Zoreth and his team navigated through the desolate landscape, following a series of coordinates that led them underground. They'd reached the entrance to a hidden underground facility, its massive metal doors rusted and half-buried in dirt. The air around them grew colder, as if the very Earth was hiding something dark and ancient beneath its surface. Zoreth gave a signal, and his soldiers began to clear the debris around the entrance. It was a slow and careful process. The doors, though old, were massive and strong. After what felt like hours of digging, the team finally gained access to the facility. They stepped inside, their footsteps echoing in the dark, abandoned hallways. The place was eerie, filled with rows of dusty, forgotten equipment. The walls were lined with rusting metal, and the air smelled stale. The humans who had once used this place were long gone, and their weapons had long been abandoned. But Zoreth wasn't worried. To him, this was just another ghostly relic, a reminder of a once proud species that had fallen. He ordered his soldiers to fan out and search the facility for any signs of valuable technology. They walked past rows of machines, some half dismantled, others still in a state of disrepair. Most of the equipment seemed useless, but Zoreth's eyes kept scanning, searching for something, anything, that could prove useful. As Zoreth walked deeper into the facility, he noticed something unusual. In the back of the room, hidden behind layers of dust and debris, stood a large, imposing object. It was partially covered with tarps, its shape distorted by age and neglect. It looked like nothing more than a forgotten relic, an old war machine that had outlived its usefulness. Curious, Zoreth approached the object, his soldiers following him. The closer he got, the more he could feel the weight of the ancient machine's presence. There was something about it, something that made the air feel heavier, almost as if the very machine had a life of its own. He had never seen anything like it before. "Commander, what is this?" one of his soldiers asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Zoreth motioned for his team to clear the tarps from the object. As the covers were pulled away, a massive tank emerged from the shadows, its rusted armor reflecting the dim light of their helmets. The tank looked old, far older than anything the aliens had seen. But despite its age, it was clear that it had been designed for battle. The size of the tank alone was intimidating, and its weaponry was unlike anything Zoreth had ever encountered. The alien soldiers stepped back, their laughter echoing in the room. They mocked the tank, calling it a useless pile of junk. They couldn't believe that this was what humanity had left behind, a rusty old machine, far too primitive to pose any threat. But Zoreth, still cautious, stood silent. There was something about the tank that intrigued him. It didn't look like much, but there was an undeniable energy in the air. Could it be? Could this old machine actually be more than just a relic? Zorath moved closer, his hand hovering over the controls. He couldn't resist the urge to examine the machine further. He pressed a button on the side of the tank, almost as if it were an impulse. The sound of whirring metal filled the air as the tank's systems began to power up. At first, it seemed like nothing had happened, but then something extraordinary occurred. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a low hum echoed from deep within the machine. The tank's lights flickered on, and its engines rumbled to life. The alien soldiers froze in shock. This wasn't possible. How could a machine this old be functioning? Zorath's heart raced. This wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon. A weapon that had been hidden away for centuries, waiting for someone to awaken it. The mockery of the aliens turned into fear as the tank's massive cannon slowly turned toward them, its systems locking into place. In that moment, Zorath realized that the humans were not as weak as they had believed. There was something far more dangerous about Earth than anyone had ever imagined. And now, humanity's secret weapon had just awoken. The stage was set. What the aliens thought would be an easy victory had just turned into a battle for survival. The tank awakens. The underground facility, once silent and lifeless, now hummed with an energy the alien soldiers had never anticipated. The ancient tank, long forgotten by humanity and buried beneath layers of dust and debris, had come to life. Its rusted body creaked as it shifted, the sound of its mechanical joints groaning in protest against years of disuse. Yet, despite its age, the tank moved with a terrifying purpose. Zorath, the alien commander, watched in stunned silence as the massive war machine came to life. His heart raced in disbelief. The soldiers, who had mocked the relic just moments ago, were now stepping back, their faces drained of color. The tank's systems were booting up, its engines growling like a sleeping giant waking from an ancient slumber. It was as if the tank had been waiting for this moment all along. The air around them grew tense. The alien soldiers, normally so confident in their strength, now seemed small in the face of this unexpected threat. Zorath, still stunned, slowly stepped forward. His fingers hovered over the tank's control panel. The machine was powered by some unknown technology, ancient human tech that was somehow still functional after all these years. The sound of the tank's internal mechanisms whirring echoed in the room. Lights flickered across the tank's metal frame, and for a moment, it felt like the entire facility was vibrating with energy. Zorath's team stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The tank had powered on, but it wasn't just a forgotten relic. It was a living weapon, waiting for a command. The soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen advanced alien technology, but nothing quite like this. Earth, they had believed, was a dying world, with its technology obsolete and weak. But now, they were facing something entirely different. Zorath narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of the situation. Could this tank really be what they feared it might be? Could this ancient piece of human technology be enough to turn the tide of the war? Suddenly, the tank's cannon moved. It swung into position, aimed directly at Zorath and his team. The alien commander froze. The cannon's targeting system whirred, locking onto them with an uncanny precision. The soldiers could hear the low hum of energy building inside the tank, preparing for what would undoubtedly be a powerful blast. Zorath quickly signaled to his troops. "Move. Get to cover," he ordered, his voice tight with urgency. But before they could react, a loud roar erupted from the tank's cannon. The blast tore through the air like thunder, hitting the wall nearby with a force that sent the soldiers flying backward. The ground shook beneath their feet, and dust and debris filled the air. The alien soldiers scrambled, trying to regain their footing. The tank had fired with such power that they hadn't even had time to react. Zorath, his heart pounding in his chest, turned to see the remains of the wall where the blast had hit. It was gone, completely obliterated. There was no doubt now. The tank was no mere relic. It was a weapon of unimaginable power. Zorath's mind raced. What kind of weapon could the humans have hidden away for so long? And why had they abandoned it? He had heard stories of Earth's ancient warriors, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. He had thought the humans were weak, their best days long behind them. But now, in the face of this machine, everything had changed. The soldiers were scrambling to regroup, but it was clear that they were outmatched. The tank, powered by forgotten human technology, had proven itself to be far more advanced than anything the aliens had encountered. It wasn't just a relic, it was a testament to the strength and ingenuity of humanity. Zorath knew they had to act fast. If they didn't neutralize this threat, they would be facing an entirely new war, one that they were not prepared for. He quickly ordered his troops to regroup and prepare for a full assault. The tank had to be destroyed before it could do any more damage. But as the soldiers began to move into position, something unexpected happened. The tank's cannon slowly retracted, and the massive war machine turned its attention to the rest of the facility. Its sensors were scanning the area, as if searching for something. Zorath watched in disbelief. What was the tank doing? It wasn't firing. And it wasn't just sitting idle. It was active, aware. The ground trembled again as the tank moved forward, its massive treads slowly grinding across the concrete floor. Zorath's team hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The tank seemed to be waiting for something. Its systems were still powered, but it wasn't attacking. Not yet, at least. Zorath looked back at his soldiers. The tank had awoken, but it was unclear what its intentions were. Had it been activated by accident, or was there something deeper at play? The mysteries of Earth's ancient technology were far beyond his understanding. "Prepare yourselves," Zorath muttered under his breath. "We may have just awakened something far more dangerous than we ever realized." The soldiers steeled themselves for the inevitable battle that was about to unfold. They had never encountered anything like this before, but they knew one thing for certain. Earth's hidden weapon was no joke, and they had just stirred the hornet's nest. The air was thick with tension as the tank continued to move, its engines roaring to life once again. What had seemed like a routine mission had suddenly turned into a nightmare. And as the tank's glowing lights illuminated the darkened room, the aliens began to understand that this was only the beginning. The battle begins. The room was silent, except for the hum of the ancient tank's engines. The air seemed to thicken with tension as Zorath and his soldiers stood frozen, watching the machine move. It had powered up in a way that was beyond their understanding. And now, it seemed to be aware of its surroundings. It was as if the tank was no longer just a piece of outdated technology, but a sentient force ready to fight. Zorath's mind raced. He had seen powerful weapons before, but nothing like this. The tank was not just an ancient relic, it was a force of nature. Its cannon had already demonstrated its destructive power, and now it was scanning the facility, seemingly preparing for something more. The soldiers shifted nervously, weapons drawn, but no one dared to fire just yet. The alien commander could feel the weight of their fear. They had underestimated the humans. They had come here thinking it would be a simple mission to eliminate any remaining resistance, but now they were standing face to face with a weapon that could change the course of the war. Zorath's eyes narrowed as he watched the tank carefully. The cannon's targeting system whirred to life again, its red targeting laser scanning the room as it locked onto different objects. It was as though the tank was choosing its next target, calculating, deliberating. With a sudden motion, the tank's turret swung toward the far wall, its cannon aiming with deadly precision. The soldiers braced themselves, but nothing happened. The cannon did not fire. The alien soldiers exchanged confused looks. What was the tank waiting for? Had it malfunctioned? Was it too old to function properly? Zorath clenched his fists in frustration. He had no answers. They had no way of knowing how this relic worked. But then, in the blink of an eye, the tank's cannon fired once again, this time with even more power than before. The blast tore through the air, hitting the far wall with a force that shattered the concrete and sent debris flying in every direction. The shockwave sent Zoreth and his soldiers tumbling backward, but they quickly regained their footing. The room was now filled with smoke and dust, making it hard to see. For a moment, everything was chaos. The tank's weaponry was far beyond anything they had anticipated. It had fired with incredible force, leveling part of the facility with a single blast. Zoreth's soldiers, once so confident in their superiority, were now scrambling for cover. They had never faced a threat like this before. Zoreth, however, was not so easily shaken. As the smoke cleared, he quickly surveyed the room. The tank had fired with deadly intent, but it hadn't yet fired again. The soldiers had taken cover, and the immediate danger seemed to have passed. The question now was, what next? Would the tank keep firing, or had it just been a warning shot? "Regroup," Zoreth shouted, his voice cutting through the dust-filled air. "Prepare for an assault. We need to take it down before it has a chance to fire again." His soldiers hesitated for a moment, still shaken by the tank's overwhelming power, but Zoreth's command was clear. They had no choice but to fight back. They quickly got into position, weapons aimed, preparing for a full assault on the tank. Zoreth, his mind racing, thought quickly. He knew that this tank was more than just an obstacle. It was a symbol of the humans' hidden strength, their resilience. They had been pushed to the edge of extinction, but they were not gone. They had fought back, and now this relic was their weapon of revenge. Zoreth wasn't the only one who realized this. His soldiers, seeing their commander's determination, rallied. Their fear turned to resolve, and they moved into position to take the fight to the tank. If they didn't stop it now, they would regret it. The air was electric with anticipation as the soldiers advanced. They fired their weapons, their energy blasts crackling through the air toward the tank. But the tank's advanced armor absorbed the shots with ease. The energy blasts merely ricocheted off its surface, doing no damage. Zoreth's eyes narrowed as he studied the tank. It wasn't just its firepower that made it dangerous. It was the fact that it seemed to be impervious to their attacks. They needed a different strategy. A direct assault was useless. He turned to his soldiers. "Flank it," he barked. "Get around it and find a weak point." The soldiers spread out, trying to encircle the tank from different angles. But as they moved, the tank seemed to anticipate their every move. Its turret rotated smoothly, tracking the soldiers' positions with unnerving accuracy. It was as if the tank knew exactly what they were planning. Suddenly, a blast from the tank's cannon ripped through the air once more. It hit one of the alien soldiers head-on, throwing him back with a force that left his body a smoking wreck. The others ducked for cover, now more determined than ever to find a way to bring this behemoth down. Zoreth clenched his jaw. The tank was relentless, its power unmatched. But he wasn't about to give up. He had faced countless enemies, and he had never backed down before. If the humans had this kind of weapon, they were not as weak as he had believed. They were survivors, and that made them dangerous. The battle continued, the aliens trying to outsmart the tank, but the ancient machine proved to be more than a match for them. Every move they made was countered by the tank's swift reactions. It was clear that this war was no longer a simple conquest, it was a fight for survival. As the tension in the air mounted, Zoreth realized one thing. The humans were not defeated. They had hidden away their strongest weapon, and now that it was awake, it was unstoppable. The roar of retribution. The battle raged on. Zoreth's soldiers were caught in a web of uncertainty. Every time they thought they had a plan, the tank would counter with unimaginable force. No matter where they positioned themselves, no matter how many weapons they threw at it, the tank simply absorbed the attacks and kept firing. The relentless barrage from its cannon sent shockwaves through the facility, destroying everything in its path. The alien soldiers had no idea how to combat it. Their advanced technology seemed useless against the ancient tank, whose power appeared to be endless. The energy blasts ricocheted off its armored hull like mere sparks from a fire. Zorath, usually so confident in his tactics, found himself at a loss. This was not a battle of force alone. It was a fight for survival, and the humans' forgotten weapon had proven to be far more than they had ever anticipated. Zorath took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He knew that if they didn't come up with a strategy soon, the humans' relic would destroy them. And worse, it would send a message to the entire galaxy that humanity was not as weak as they had been led to believe. That could change everything. He looked at his soldiers, who were crouched behind the wreckage of the destroyed walls, firing their energy weapons from behind cover. They were growing frustrated. Their confidence was shattered, and the fear of the tank's devastating firepower was beginning to take hold. But Zorath knew that fear was a weapon in itself, one that could be used against them if they let it take over. "Listen to me," Zorath barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've been fighting for centuries, and we've faced worse than this. We will not let a relic of the past stop us now. We will adapt, or we will fall." The soldiers hesitated, their fear still evident, but Zorath's words rallied them. They had faced overwhelming odds before, and they had always found a way to overcome them. This tank was no different. But even as they readied themselves to try again, the tank did something unexpected. The cannon paused. The humming sound of its engines went quiet for a moment, and the soldiers dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was out of ammunition or energy. It was an illusion. Before they could react, the tank's turret swung around with terrifying speed. The cannon's targeting laser locked onto one of the soldiers trying to flank it. Without a second of hesitation, the tank fired again, sending an explosive blast that obliterated the soldier in an instant. The room shook as the force of the blast sent debris scattering in all directions. The remaining soldiers froze. The message was clear. The tank was far from out of energy. It was just getting started. Zorath clenched his fists in frustration. How could they possibly beat something like this? They were trained to face advanced alien fleets, not forgotten relics of a long-lost human civilization. They had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now they were paying the price for it. But Zorath wasn't one to give up easily. He had spent years commanding fleets, outsmarting enemies who were far more advanced than the humans. He had to find a way to beat the tank. There had to be a weakness, a vulnerability they could exploit. As his mind raced, Zorath noticed something. The tank, as powerful as it was, had one flaw. It was too focused on its cannon. While it tracked them with its turret and fired its devastating shots, it seemed to ignore its surroundings. The soldiers could see that there were moments when the tank was vulnerable, when its cannon had to recharge, or when its sensors were distracted by movement from a soldier or a blast. Zorath's eyes gleamed. He had a plan. "Flank it again," he shouted. "Target its sensors. We can't destroy the armor, but we can disable its targeting system." The soldiers, their fear now replaced by a new determination, spread out once again. This time, they targeted the tank's sensors, its eyes and ears. They fired precision shots, aimed at the sensitive parts of the tank's system, hoping to disable its targeting ability. The tank fired again, but its aim was off. The blast missed by a wide margin, hitting the wall behind Zorath and sending debris raining down. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give the soldiers the opening they needed. Zorath moved swiftly, using the chaos to his advantage. He led a small group of soldiers toward the tank's rear, where they could avoid its direct line of fire. As they neared the machine, they saw the vulnerable panels where the sensors were housed. With a combination of quick thinking and precise fire, the soldiers aimed for these spots, their energy blasts cutting through the tank's outer shell. One by one, the sensors on the tank began to falter. The cannon's aim became erratic, and its shots were less accurate. The tank was no longer as dangerous as before. Zorath felt a surge of hope. Perhaps they could actually win this. But just as they thought they had gained the upper hand, the tank did something even more unexpected. It shifted its focus. Instead of relying on its cannon, it deployed smaller, faster drones from hidden compartments within its hull. These drones swarmed around Zoreth and his soldiers, attacking with laser beams and high-speed maneuvering. They were like bees around a hive, and they brought a new level of chaos to the battlefield. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Zoreth and his soldiers now faced a new challenge, fighting off the tank's drones while still trying to disable the tank's core. The tank had proven itself a force to be reckoned with, and they had no choice but to continue pushing forward. This fight was no longer just about surviving. It was about proving that the alien forces were not invincible. Humanity's hidden power had shaken the galaxy to its core. The ancient tank, with its overwhelming might, had become the symbol of humanity's strength, a strength that would never be underestimated again. The tank's fury unleashed. Zoreth's pulse raced as the drones swarmed around him and his soldiers. Each drone was a relentless terror, flying with speed and precision, firing laser beams that burned through the air. The very ground seemed to tremble beneath the onslaught. They weren't just fighting a relic. They were now facing the full fury of an ancient weapon, a force that had been designed to lay waste to entire fleets. Zoreth ducked behind a ruined wall, narrowly avoiding the laser blast that sliced through the air inches from his face. The impact sent a shockwave through his body, and he could feel the heat even behind the cover. Sweat dripped down his forehead. He had to regain control of the situation. This was no longer a skirmish. It was an all-out war, and the humans' Relic tank was the battlefield's dominant player. Fall back. Regroup. Zoreth barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. We need to destroy the drones first. Take out the core, then we'll deal with the tank. But even as he spoke, Zoreth realized how difficult it would be. The drones were everywhere, too fast, too numerous. It wasn't just a matter of destruction. It was a matter of survival. If they didn't act quickly, they would all be reduced to mere debris, and the tank would continue its merciless rampage. His thoughts raced, and a plan began to form. The drones, despite their speed and firepower, had one major weakness. They were programmed for quick strikes, not prolonged engagements. They could take out individual soldiers, but if the aliens could isolate them, they could destroy the drones without being overwhelmed. Zoreth turned to his most trusted lieutenant, a seasoned fighter named Relic. We need to get to the control panel. There's a way to override the drone's commands. If we can access it, we can turn them against the tank. Relic nodded. Understood, Commander. I'll lead a team to the rear. We'll flank them from the shadows. Zoreth's gaze hardened as he observed the battlefield. His soldiers were still pinned down by the drones, many of them struggling to reload their weapons or retreat to safer positions. But the aliens had something the humans didn't: advanced technology and tactics. Yet it wasn't enough to defeat the tank. It was designed to crush enemies like them. And Zoreth realized that no matter how advanced the alien forces were, they had made a grave mistake underestimating humanity. Stay sharp, Zoreth said to Relic, as the lieutenant assembled a team to move behind enemy lines. The tank may be distracted, but it's still very much alive. Don't forget that. Relic's team vanished into the wreckage, moving with silent precision. Their goal was clear: find the control system that operated the drones and shut them down. If they could manage that, the tide of the battle would turn in their favor. But it was a dangerous mission. The tank would no doubt try to stop them. As Relic's team advanced, Zoreth turned his attention to the front lines. He could see that his remaining soldiers were slowly regrouping, forming a defensive line to buy time. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. The drones continued their relentless attacks, firing their high-powered lasers and making it nearly impossible to move without being hit. Zoreth had to admit that the humans' Relic tank was a beast in every sense of the word. But he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not when the mission was so close to being completed. And then, out of nowhere, the battlefield changed once again. From the smoke and dust, The tank's cannon roared to life, sending a shockwave of destruction across the entire area. The blast hit a nearby building, turning it into a cloud of debris. Zoreth's soldiers ducked for cover as the shockwave rattled their bodies. It wasn't just an ordinary shot, it was a statement. The tank was awake, it was alive. Zoreth's heart raced. The sheer power of the shot reminded him of the sheer potential of this machine. The aliens had thought they could conquer the galaxy with their advanced technology and fleets, but they had underestimated humanity's ability to hide its greatest weapon. The relic was not some outdated piece of machinery. It was a symbol of everything humanity had been, and everything they could still be. Relic's team reached the rear of the tank. As they approached the control panel, they were careful to avoid the drone's detection. They could see the panel hidden beneath a layer of rubble. One of the soldiers quickly pulled it free, revealing a complex system of circuits and wires. "We're in," Relic said. "Start the shutdown sequence." His hands flew over the controls, working quickly but cautiously. The drones continued their barrage from above, but the tank seemed distracted. Was it because of the attack from Zoreth's forces, or was there something else? Relic didn't know, but he didn't have time to think about it. They had a job to do. With a few quick commands, Relic initiated the sequence. The drones hesitated for a split second, as if unsure of what was happening. Then, in a stunning moment of triumph, they stopped. The once unstoppable swarm froze midair, their laser blasts ceasing. For the first time, the battlefield went silent. The tank, however, was still very much alive. Its cannon, though temporarily disabled, was not enough to stop it. Zoreth, seeing the drones now inactive, turned to his soldiers. "Now, we take the tank down. Focus your fire on its core." With the drones no longer a threat, the remaining alien forces began their final assault on the tank. Their weapons were stronger now, focused on the heart of the machine. But even as the tank's outer armor began to crumble under the pressure, the true fight was still ahead. The tank had no intention of going down without a fight, and Zoreth had no intention of letting it stand in the way of his victory. The battle for control. Zoreth stood in the midst of the chaos, his soldiers engaging the remaining drones that had once been their greatest threat. His heart beat with anticipation. This was it, the final phase of the battle. The relic tank had taken everything the aliens had thrown at it, and yet it still stood, a symbol of humanity's ancient strength. The tank's massive form loomed ahead, its cannon still roaring to life, shaking the ground with each pulse. The core had been weakened, but Zoreth knew that it wasn't just the tank's firepower they had to worry about. Its sheer size and imposing presence made it a towering threat. It was a machine of war, built to crush entire civilizations. And now it was facing the full force of Zoreth's alien forces. "Focus on its engines," Zoreth shouted, his voice cutting through the noise of battle. "If we can disable its mobility, we can finish this." His orders were clear. They had to neutralize the tank's ability to move or aim. Only then could they bring it down for good. Zoreth knew it was going to be risky. Human ingenuity and resourcefulness had made this tank nearly indestructible, but they had no other choice. He glanced toward Relic, who was still working with his team to ensure the drones stayed disabled. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning debris. His soldiers moved like shadows, darting in and out of cover, their weapons trained on the heart of the tank. Zoreth couldn't help but admire their resolve, knowing they had come a long way since the start of the conflict. But just as the aliens began to make their final assault on the tank, something unexpected happened. The ground trembled once again, but this time it was different. The tank, which had been relatively still for the past few moments, began to rumble with an eerie mechanical growl, a deep guttural sound that echoed through the battlefield. Zoreth's instincts screamed at him to move, but he was frozen in place, his gaze locked on the tank. Something was happening, something far worse than he could have imagined. The tank's turret rotated with a sharp mechanical click, its massive cannon aiming straight at Zoreth and his forces. He didn't have time to react before the cannon discharged once more, a blinding flash of energy that seared through the air. Zorath barely managed to dive for cover, but the shockwave of the blast threw him off balance. The heat was overwhelming, singing the air around him as debris flew in every direction. He could hear his soldiers screaming as the shockwave tore through their ranks, and for a split second, it felt like everything had been swallowed by the explosion. He looked up, breathless, and saw the wreckage of his soldiers. Some were still struggling to move, while others were motionless. His heart sank. The tank wasn't just a machine of war, it was a monster. It had absorbed everything the aliens had thrown at it, and was now fighting back with terrifying vengeance. "Retreat," Zorath ordered, his voice shaking with fury and desperation. "We need to fall back. Now." But the order came too late. Before his soldiers could properly regroup, the tank's cannons fired again, sending shockwaves through the area. Zorath's forces were scattered, unable to mount a coordinated defense. The sheer power of the tank's weaponry had shattered any chance of a quick victory. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Zorath's mind remained sharp. He knew that the tank had revealed its true power, but that wasn't the end of it. Humanity's relic might have just destroyed their best efforts, but it had also shown its weakness. The tank wasn't invincible. It had limitations, just like any weapon. They needed to find those limitations and exploit them. "Relic," Zorath shouted, hoping his lieutenant had made it through the chaos. "We can't hold out here. Get to the core. We still have one chance to end this." Relic's voice came through the comms, steady despite the chaos surrounding him. "We're on it, Commander. We'll disable the cannon, but we need time." Time. Zorath clenched his fists. He didn't know how much longer they could hold on. The tank's power was beyond anything they had faced before, but the fight was far from over. If they didn't act fast, the aliens would be wiped out entirely. With renewed determination, Zorath rallied the remaining soldiers. To the core. Push forward. For victory. As the last of the drones hovered overhead, Zorath and his forces regrouped, preparing for the final push. They couldn't afford any more mistakes. Every move now counted. The battle raged on, with each side fighting to the bitter end. The tank roared, its massive cannon firing again, but Zorath's soldiers moved swiftly, dodging and weaving through the wreckage. They knew what they had to do. But what Zorath didn't know, what no one could have anticipated, was that the tank's true power had only just begun to reveal itself. Something deep within the ancient machine stirred, something that would make this battle even more dangerous than before. The final confrontation was near, and with it, the fate of the galaxy would be decided. The final stand. The battlefield was a scene of devastation. Broken drones, scorched alien soldiers, and twisted wreckage scattered across the ground. The Relic tank had crushed all in its path, showing no mercy. Zorath, though battered and bruised, had managed to regroup what remained of his forces. His once confident alien army was now on the verge of collapse. The human relic was unstoppable, and it had proven itself to be far more than they had bargained for. Zorath wiped the blood from his brow as he stared at the monstrous machine, towering above them. Its massive cannons were silent for now, but Zorath knew better than to believe it was done. No, the tank was just waiting for the right moment to unleash its fury once again. The sound of clanking metal filled the air as Relic appeared beside him, grim-faced but resolute. "We found the weakness, Commander," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "The tank's core is unstable. We can destroy it, but we need to get close." Zorath nodded. The truth was, they had little left to lose. Their forces had been shattered, their hope hanging by a thread. The tank had destroyed their drones, torn apart their lines of defense, and now it was clear. This was their last chance. "How do we get close without getting vaporized?" Zorath asked, his voice a mixture of frustration and desperation. He had seen enough death today to last a lifetime, but he knew this was no time for hesitation. Relic pointed to a small opening at the tank's rear. just beneath its massive treads. There, Commander. The back of the tank is vulnerable. It's unguarded right now. We can slip through, but we'll have to move quickly. Zorath weighed the options in his mind. The path was dangerous. There was no doubt about it. But staying in the open, trying to fight the tank head-on, was certain death. Their only hope now was a quick strike to destroy the core before the tank could unleash another devastating barrage. "We move out in 10, Zorath ordered. "Cover me. Relic, you lead the way. We're ending this now." His soldiers nodded, each one knowing the peril they faced. There was no room for failure. If they couldn't destroy the core now, the galaxy would be lost to the human relic tank's unstoppable power. It had proven itself to be more than just a weapon. It was the key to humanity's potential, a terrifying force that could change the course of the galaxy forever. The remaining soldiers moved swiftly, ducking behind shattered walls and burning debris to avoid detection. Every step was a calculated risk, but their resolve was unwavering. They knew what was at stake. As they approached the rear of the tank, the ground shook with each heavy step of the machine. Its engine hummed like a predator preparing to strike. Zorath could feel his pulse racing, each second stretching longer than the last. His breath came in shallow gasps, but he kept his focus. "Stay low," Relic whispered, motioning for everyone to get into position. "We're almost there." Zorath took a deep breath. His heart pounded in his chest as they reached the opening at the back of the tank. The machine's exhaust ports glowed faintly, and the metal hissed with steam. It was clear that the tank's core was under strain, but it was still functional. "Now," Zorath shouted, his voice cutting through the tension. Without waiting for a response, he darted forward, leaping into the small opening with Relic and the rest of his soldiers close behind. The thick, metallic walls of the tank surrounded them as they moved deeper inside. The interior of the tank was a maze of wires, pipes, and metal. The air was thick with the smell of oil and burning circuits. Zorath's heart raced as they pushed forward, trying to reach the core. The sound of the tank's movements outside was deafening, but inside it was eerily quiet, save for the sound of their boots tapping on the cold floor. Suddenly, a loud, shrieking alarm blared, and the lights inside the tank flickered. The tank had sensed their presence. Zorath's stomach twisted with dread. They had no time to waste. "We have to move faster," he shouted as a low growl echoed through the walls. The core was close, but the tank was aware of their intrusion now. Relic motioned to a large control panel ahead of them. "There. The core's control interface is right there. We can disable it if we get to that console." But before they could take another step, the ground beneath them rumbled. The tank's internal defenses had activated, and the corridor was now filled with the screeching sound of security drones deploying. "Stay back," Zorath ordered. He turned to his soldiers. "We hold them off. Relic, disable the core. Now." Zorath and the others drew their weapons, taking defensive positions as the drones stormed toward them. The room erupted into chaos as they fired their weapons, trying to keep the drones at bay long enough for Relic to do his job. Every shot they fired felt like a last-ditch effort, but the soldiers fought like never before. Their survival instincts kicked in, and they battled fiercely against the relentless drones. Relic was at the console now, his fingers flying over the controls. Sweat dripped from his brow as he worked quickly, his focus absolute. With each passing second, Zorath could feel the pressure mounting. The tank's defenses were formidable, but they had come too far to fail now. Finally, Relic shouted, "I've got it. The core is deactivated." With a final, desperate roar, the tank shuddered and groaned, its massive form beginning to lose its power. The internal systems flickered, and the drones dropped to the floor, lifeless. For a moment, everything was still. Zorath looked at his soldiers, their faces filled with exhaustion, but also a sense of triumph. The tank was no longer a threat. They had done it. Humanity's ancient relic tank had been defeated. The galaxy was safe. But as Zorath and his soldiers emerged from the wreckage, he knew one thing. Humanity's power had been awakened, and the balance of the galaxy had changed forever.